Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at in the world. But I'm Elisa Borney, and I'm going to be hosting today's daily Lunch and Learn. Just a quick introduction for me. I've been at Decisions for over 4 years or so, and I should be able to answer any and all questions that come my way. But if not, we can always take it offline. Now, we are reporting live from Decisions. We are moving headquarters into Virginia Beach instead of Chesapeake. So that's been a very exciting move this week. But we hope everybody's doing well, and we'll be able to use this full hour to address any sort of questions that you may have, or any questions that may come up. So with that said, don't forget about the Q&A function. So you can submit your questions into either the chat or the Zoom Q&A function. So we'll go ahead and open it up and ask away. Also, if you're not too keen on typing, you can raise your hand and I'll also put you off mute. So just let me know. Also, just to fill in some air here, we did not get any questions ahead of time today, so we do have a fairly quiet day if no one has questions. All right, so we do have one question. Question is there a way to capture the end state of a flow if someone clicks the X at the top of the form, ending the flow? So it sounds like, if I get the picture right, you have a show form step in the flow. I'm assuming that it's not an add task step, but the show form step, if you do click X, there, if you use the default header, that will actually not capture the state. Let me go ahead and do something real quick. I'll pull up my decisions environment. And we can just walk through this a little bit. All right. I should be sharing my screen here. But I have my 7.0 environment of decisions up. I'm going to go ahead and go to the studio and just create a flow so we can kind of see what we're talking about here. Actually, I might already have a flow with a form in it. So let's check this flow one out. Lovely. Okay. So my show form step here, it's not the add task step. Super simple form that I have apparently. It's just got a couple of fields. I'm going to go ahead and just save this, and we can debug this just to see this in action. Now, if what you're saying is there a way to capture the end state if somebody clicks this X button? Correct. So if you use the default header, that is not going to capture anything, and it will actually not allow you to bring up the form, and your flow will not continue. However, what you could do is to disable the header and put your own close button. So for example, let's say, I'll move this over here. Let's say I wanted to put a button here, maybe an image button. We'll just drag that to the right. And I'll just pick an X, or look for close perhaps in our icon library. Sure, we'll just do one of these. So when you have an image button there, you should see a new path appear from your form. And then what you could also do is disable the form header. You can do that one of two ways. I believe in form setup, you can choose to use, oh, and actually it's not here, I believe. Sizing, sub-dialog, yes, sizing and sub-dialog. There's an option here to hide title bar, in which that will not appear. So now if I debug this, I might need to save it real quick, but you'll see that the default X does not appear. And now if I click X, now it can go down the path and I can handle it anyway. So now I can save the data from the form. I could change the state of where the form is at, things like that. So you have a little bit more control by using, disabling the header bar and then creating your own, close mechanism instead. Okay. Next question that we have, in the case editor, the following error message was thrown. No parameterless constructor defined for type. What's the root cause of this and what's a way to debug? That's a good question. I haven't seen that error message. No parameterless constructor defined for type. My initial reaction or guess to it is that it has to do with something that's been defined with the data structure, obviously. Now the root cause of it, I'm not sure. That is something that we would have to debug, but with cases, a great way to debug them, to really figure out where the source of the problem or issue is the global debugger. Now, I'm not sure, Josh, what version you are in, what version you're working in, and I can unmute you if you'd like, actually, real quick. Let me figure out this participants list.
Hello, Hailey. I'm in 7.2.
Okay, 7.2. So you should have the global debugger available. And so the global debugger is going to be accessible in the folder tree to the left-hand side. And you'll see if you click this gears icon, you can show the global debugger and turn it on. So once you do that, in another tab, so you'd likely want to duplicate tabs or have it open in the other tab. What you'll want to do is then run your flow, get that error message to pop up, and you should be able to see all the flows, including trigger flows, any sort of user actions that are being, clicked on.
Okay, perfect. I'll try that out. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, sorry, I don't know exactly what the parameterless constructor defined for type error is, but yeah, let us know what you find out in the global debugger, and if you're not able to identify where it's coming from, we'll more than happily look into it on our support
Okay.
team.
Okay, appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I do see more and more people joining. So we do have some questions that we've answered already. Feel free to ask more in the questions and answers panel in Zoom. Type them in chat or raise your hand and I'll put you off mute. So any three of those options will be perfectly okay. looks like we got another question in. I am working in version 6, not 7. I do see the hide title bar, but it doesn't seem to be suppressing the title bar on my form in the flow. Is there something else I should look for? Let me try just bringing up my 6.0 environment, but it should be working the same way. So let me just pull that up. What version of 6 are you on? Which revision specifically, Scott? I'll try to take you off mute there.
Remind me how to find the exact version number.
Yes, in 6.0, you can click the little person icon on the top right-hand side of your screen and go to About.
6.12.1.
Oh, we're on the same version. Okay, so let's give this a try. I'm gonna pull up my apps here. This environment does have some clutter, so you'll have to excuse my mess, but we'll go ahead and go into creating. Actually, let me just create a new folder here. I'll go ahead and create a new flow.
Maybe there was something on the form title source that I needed to change to. But
Okay, let's see. I'll add a show form step.
Okay.
I'll just create a quick form here. Sure.
your solution is exactly what I'm looking for. I just couldn't make it work.
Okay. Well, let's see. We'll save this and get to the bottom of it. Okay, so in 6, it should be in the same place, form setup, sizing, subdialog, and then all you did was do a hide title bar. Do all of the other settings look similar?
Yes.
Okay. So then let's debug this. And what we might do is have you share your screen if this is working on my end, but not yours. Oh, there's the title bar for me as well. Let me also try this because it's possible it's working, but I'm going to run it from outside of the flow. Yep. So in the debugger, I believe it's going to appear for you in 6. I'm not sure why. It makes sense for it to appear in the debugger, but not in outside the flow. So maybe try testing it outside of the debugger.
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent.
All right. We have another question as well from Alex. Alex, I'm going to let you go on and talk a little bit about your use case here. So I will, yep.
Thank you. Yeah, I was saying just wait a second, I can phrase the question better. I see that there are 2 big ways of fetching data from tables in decisions. One that involves steps like fetch entity or fetch distinct values. They seem to be very similar. And the other is for those fetch steps that appear under the user-defined types. And under those, there are, fetch all by folder ID, fetch by name and folder ID. Then there's also get all or get edit copy and whatnot. I try to look at the info for each of those. and it's blank, right? So it's difficult to say what is the true difference between one and the other. And my first question is there any preferred way or is there any preferred mechanism? Because in the end, fetch is fetch, right? It's a retrieve to a database table.
Right.
The biggest thing is the where clause, you know, the constraint that you apply to that search. And that is not very clear in either of these steps. So any guidance that you can provide would be really, really appreciated.
Right. And you're absolutely right. It's really about that where clause, right? And what we always recommend is that you try to fetch the least amount of data that as you possibly need. So the where clause is important. And what you'll notice about those steps in the user defined types is that although they're great, right? They're great out of the box, especially the delete steps, right? Personally, I think that's typically where I find myself using these, default created steps. But when it comes to a fetch, generally a good rule of thumb is to use fetch entities if it's querying a decisions table. Reason being, with the fetch entities, you can define as many clauses, fetch criterias as you need. And so this is a little bit more flexible with those conditions that you can create for the data you're retrieving. So typically this is best, and especially since, let's say something does change down the line where yes, tomorrow, today you're looking at, if the department is, sales, but tomorrow you need to change that to if department is sales, and this person started within the last 90 days, right? If you need to add that criteria, it's much easier to be able to just add that condition on the fetch step rather than using one of the out of the box, which is simply by ID or a particular folder ID. So it's really all about the where clause there. Now, if you're in a situation where you're only needing to use the step for fetching, let's say, the ID of a particular entity, right? Then I could see a use case for this, but there's not really any sort of performance benefit that you're getting by using these out of the box steps. So again, I think general rule of thumb, it's good to use the fetch entities step.
Yeah, I guess that the biggest benefit of using the ones that you were highlighting a second ago would be that you don't need to know where decisions stores the information, because I understand that at least in this is a process, right? As a process folder, you store the information in 3 different tables, and part of it is in, well, obviously you need to know if you really want to use the fetch entity, the standard fetch entity, you need to know in which of the 3 tables you have to go to, right? Whereas
you generally need to know the type name. You could search for it here. You can't search for any sort of your data types within this bar. So these steps aren't searchable. They're not easy to get to unless you know what type that you're trying to use or identify. But at least with this, you could say, I'm just looking for an account, and hopefully quickly identify which one that is from that search list.
So because I learned recently that there is a table, for example, you're dealing with a process, right? There is a table which keeps, it's called the process folder underscore user data, whatever is what you call your process. Then there is a flow tracking folder data, and there's an entity folder, and all these 3 are related,
right?
And they all together keep information about your process. Which, if you use fetch entity, the standard fetch entity, you need to know to which table to go. Whereas
Not necessarily, because the fetch entities, although it looks like you can only create, the fetch criteria is only based off of that specific type. So you're not going to be, let's say if you're doing a flow execution extension,
Mhm.
you're not going to be able to filter based off of the state, right? Unless you do some additional things like, select the extension type name, and then those fields may be available, but you know, uh, once you perform the fetch, all of the joins for the multiple tables, uh, that will already happen for you. So if I
even with
do, yeah, if I do pull up the entity results, let me pick maybe a flow execution extension instead, just so that we can demonstrate that.
so let me close this so I can see it.
Yeah, let's just do loan process. Right, so the fetch criteria is only going to appear for the fields that I've defined and that are actually on the flow execution extension itself, but not the folder. But once I perform the fetch, if I just look at the first item here, all of that data is going to come back. So not only do I have things like deleted on and then the additional fields, but I also have the process data, which is that flow tracking folder,
Mhm.
as well as the folder data, which should be under process folder. So all of that data will come back once you perform the fetch.
Okay. Okay, then a simple rule of thumb could be always use fetch entities and you're going to be okay, right?
Yeah,
You really don't.
that's a good general rule of thumb.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
Really
of course.
appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Now, those that could potentially change based off of, how much data that you may be fetching. But typically you're not going to run into any sort of issues unless you're doing a couple thousand at a time and batch processing.
Sorry, I just realized that I was on mute. Um, my thought was that I know that certain systems allow you to constrain the query particularly when that query is going to be used to paint a list of records on a page, right? Where you can say, don't send me more than, I don't know, 50 records and start on position 1. And then you start on position 51 and then on 101 and so on. So you can do paging, right? But I don't recall seeing that in a fetch step. But that might be done differently. I don't know.
Yeah, there are. I'm not sure if we have. I've never seen that on these steps either. But what let me just be clear. You're saying, when fetching data from a database, um, some systems have a way where you can identify a limit in terms of how many are coming back from that fetch and
Yeah, but I
be able
that
to
in
do it in
general.
batches.
Yeah, I think that you do that in the report configuration. Thinking aloud here, right? When in the report editor, I think that you set how many records you want to see in that page, and that probably adjusts the query to show that properly.
Yeah, and I have seen the limit when you create your own custom queries. So like, let's say, let's create a new query here. So I'll go to add query. Sure. So let's see. I'm just going to write select star from T folder where, let's see, name, or actually I think it's entity name. I'm going to try to run this query to see if that works. Okay. Maybe it's entity folder name. You know what?
Your entity folder. There is an entity underscore name as a field in entity folder table.
Entity underscore name, did you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah.
So there is.
I don't know whether you will have something that is called my apps in it, but
Okay, let's try this then. Oops, wrong one. Let me just entity folder. It's just on it.
you had a select
Right.
top without.
We'll just pick one of these. I'll just call it what's the folder ID? Okay, entity name. Okay, that's what we had, right? Sure, we'll call it templates. Sure. Oh,
That's interesting.
yeah, that is odd. Okay, we'll do that then. Okay, so there's 3 there. We'll just walk through that one more time. So as I was saying, you know, when you create a query here as a step, so we'll just call this get folders or template folders. Sure. So we'll just create this query, say okay.
Your name
not
can't have spaces
doing-
at least, so it's got to all be one text, all the way at the top.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
I always forget that. Wonderful. Okay. We'll go ahead and go to the flow, and I'm assuming it did go ahead and create it. So we'll go ahead and go to integration, database, local connection. Well, I think you get the idea, right? We created a query. I'll just grab one over here. These queries that you create do have a limit count. So you could say, you know, 50 here.
Yeah.
So there is a way, if you create a custom query, to be able to identify, you know, a couple of additional settings like limit count. Also, if you're not trying to, you know, you don't care about the limit count, you can just say ignore here and it'll get all of those records as well. So it
Okay.
is on those steps that is not available on the fetch entity step, however.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think that if the query gets too sophisticated, you probably have to go and write it on your own, right? And you really need to know what you're doing, which wouldn't be my case. So I plan not to use it. But I see your point. I think I understand. You know, the fetch entity would be the first, step to go to get the data. And my example in which you need limits and offsets will probably be dealt. The only use case I can think of it is for lists of records displayed, which one would do probably with a report, the report writer. And I think that you can say how many records you want displayed, and presumably that updates the query to do the limit and offset.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're only trying to show a certain amount, you could use that pagination as well and determine how many you want to display on that page before they scroll to another. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, yes, I see somebody has raised their hand.
Yeah, hi there. I just wanted to follow up on that, previous discussion. Like, for example, if you go into system administration, security accounts, like by default, this thing kind of has a whole pagination thing associated with it. So, or at least in version 6, it does. Like on my 6.17, I get a screen that has like a little box on the bottom that allows me to go to you know,
Mhm.
from, is that a control that's like out of the box?
Yep.
That's like a function of the report viewer kind of thing?
That's right. So if you're trying to get the pagination to, I guess, appear after a certain amount, you would do so actually on the page designer. So if I create a new page here, and I believe by default decisions, the decisions reports that you see allow, I think that's 100 fields. You can double check me or check me on that one. But I believe it's 100 fields by default. And then it'll paginate if you have more than 100.
Yeah, mine's 200, but
200, okay. So if you do click, you know, I have a report viewer here on my page. And if I click on that report viewer and look at the properties, I believe it's under view. And I always miss the control. So I'm going to scroll through this very slowly. Make this a little wider as well. But there is a control somewhere in the properties here to be able to identify the pagination. And that's nope. Nope. Maybe behavior. Let me check that out. Paging. Yep. So under behavior, there is use paging. So it's just using the designer settings, which should be that 200 then.
okay.
And if you say yes, you
And it
can
allows me to
identify
specify
however
that.
many. Mhm.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, in the report editor, it is set to 50. You can change that, but that's really just about the preview. That's not reflective of when you actually run the report. But this is referring to how many appear in this particular preview. And that's just for really performance so that we're not trying to load a bunch of data into the preview when it's not really necessary. So yeah, 50 here, you can change that if you'd like. I do believe it does reset every time though. So like, let's say if I change it to 100 and I close and save my report, I believe it sets it back to 50 every time. Yep.
Well, I got some questions if you don't mind me asking, Elise.
Sure thing.
All right, so I was just came from a training. That made no sense. I came from a training. Let me English right. And I got asked a question about the UI integration. So you know, like when you have a form, you go to integrations on a flow, and you say, what is it called? Yeah, so click on integration, and then you say UI form for the run as. I had a question that says, is the UI code responsive to different screen sizes? So if I select display type HTML, and let's say I run that UI code on my phone or tablet, would that form automatically resize to that new device screen size?
It's really all about how you build the form.
Okay.
So if you built a form, let's say using a different layout, or you built the form, kind of with full mobile first kind of thinking, where it looks like this, and you're kind of accounting for those things using the columns and rows. Yeah, sure, absolutely. It could kind of adjust in the way that you would anticipate based off of how you build it. Also using things like the responsive container, if you utilize the different grids and build it that way, it should reflect, vice versa. But
Gotcha.
yeah, it's all about how you build it.
Gotcha. So all that this does is just gives you a UI code to run that, to display that form in an iframe or on a device, but it doesn't resize, this component doesn't resize itself. It's all about how you design the form. Is that what I'm understanding? Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you'll see I built the form to have 1 star column, which is resizing based off of the size screens or screen size. So, as I make the form smaller, it's going to adjust as much as it possibly can. Now,
Gotcha.
if I believe I can use the emulator here, but this is emulating, it's not really doing a good job, but it's kind of emulating what it would look like on it's not really a proper emulator here, but it's emulating what it would do on a mobile device. And so you'll see again 2 columns, and it's adjusting as much as possible, but it's not really fully responsive and adjusting because of the way
Gotcha.
I built it.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
My second question is, when dealing with case entities, is there a way when I use the set entity ID or set entity state step to change the state of a case entity, is there a way that I can, instead of declaring a constant value for the state, can I just get the states of that current entity? So for example, I have a case entity that's or a vandalism case, and I have 3 states: pending investigation, or pending evidence gathering evidence, pending investigation, and then court hearing. And is there a way with the set entity state that I can just get in a drop-down list those 3 values? And so that if I change one of those states, so instead of pending court hearing, I'm going to say sentencing hearing, that would automatically update that list.
Well, I'm not sure. What would be the reasoning for wanting to do change it to a state of instead of court hearing? What was the interview
Yeah.
hearing or whatever that was?
Yeah, no, I
What would
gotcha.
be the reasoning?
So the reasoning is, so let's say I want to change my state, and I don't want to have to then go into every part of my flow where I declared the set entity step and change that state to something different. Because that would break it, right? Because I'm assuming if I have a gathering evidence, pending investigation, and court hearing, and so I have a process that says change the entity state to court hearing, but then let's say later on the process I say, hey, I'm going to change it to sentencing hearing, but then I just broke that flow that was changing my state to court hearing because it's no longer named that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So no, there's really not a way where it's easy to do this because the main thing about it is that if you change a state, let's say I'm creating a case right now, just so that I can illustrate this. But the main thing with the case is that these states, your flow is entirely driven based off of the state names that you determine in the case configuration folder, right? So if you have in fact changed the state to from court interview hearing to court hearing, let's say, yes, you do have to go into the other flows manually and change them. Now, even if you had a lookup list or a value list, right? You'd have to make sure that after you update court hearing, that you then update this list, right? So there's not really an intuitive way that the case flows or steps can inherently understand it. So that's just something you do have to manually change.
Gotcha.
Now, you could, yes, beyond the states that you set up at the top, again, use value list or use some sort of configuration data structure where you're, dynamically passing in the state names.
Mhm.
So you could do that, but it's just an additional setup that you'd have to do.
Gotcha.
Which might be a good idea if you're constantly changing it. But if you're not really constantly changing the state names, I say just do it manually.
Mhm.
So it might just be easier in the long run.
Gotcha. Now that makes sense because I'm trying to think of, I don't see a scenario where you'd want to just randomly dynamically change your state names. Because usually the ones you declare are the ones you want to use for the rest of the process. So, okay.
Right.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that whole state thing, because I actually just went through this where, you know, we've been having a certain number of predefined states forever, and then all of a sudden someone points out a spelling mistake.
Oh,
So,
goodness.
so I mean, because it's in a different language, you know, so anyway, whatever. So yeah, so I mean, I did put some thinking into this, and you know, one of the things that I thought was is that I might define the states as system constants. But like, I guess what I really want is I want the state to be a reference to a string rather than an actual string. And I don't think that decisions supports that, right? So like, I mean, what I ended up having to go and do was to write a flow that basically, you know, I would change the state to the new proper spelling, and then I'd have to write a flow to go and update all of the other states that had already been, you know, kind of initiated to reflect that you know, the new change. But I mean, but ideally, what I would like is I would like to actually in the state for the state to be a reference to like a constant, but that I don't think is possible. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm trying to think. Not in a way where it's a true reference.
Because decisions is actually storing a string, you know, ABC in the database kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
That could be an interesting, you know, DT though. You know, one thing that people have always asked for, particularly in the state or the case entities, is you know, being able to source it from a drop down or actually here, let me pull this up real quick. So what people have often asked for, and this isn't exactly what you're talking about, but it could be interesting. But on things like set state or even on the properties of the trigger flows where you can determine what states it's valid from, you'll see that this is even a free form text box. So I say, you know, this is not only available or valid in pending investigation, but also in gathering information, right? This is free form. So I could make a spelling mistake here. I could definitely see a DT for in places where states need to be sourced to be coming from an actual list from what's defined in the states of the case. That way, we could at least, at the very least, say if it doesn't match, there could be a validation error on the flow in which for you to identify what flows need to be updated. So there is that that could be done. And I'm sure that there's, other clever ways that the developers could come up with to make sure that, it's maybe sourced or, maybe it could be by the reference number instead.
Right, yep. Gotcha, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Now we have about 8 minutes or so left. I should have just done this in the beginning, but I did enable everybody to talk in the webinar. So if you do have a question, feel free to go off mute. Well, all right. If there's no other questions, then we'll have to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you either on the tomorrow's lunch and learn or in the future. All right, thanks again, guys, and don't forget about support@decisions.com if you do have any questions in the meantime. But have a great day.